I'm not afraid to admit when I'm wrong about something, and if that's something you can respect, make sure to like the video and hit the subscribe button down below. So what was I wrong about? Well, as the title of the video says, I think there's a possibility that there could be a sequel to Grounded or another game in the series at some point in the future. Now, why am I wrong? Why was I wrong, or why am I admitting that I was wrong? Well, if you were watching me back when the 1.0 release happened in September of 2022, and shortly thereafter, and even just before, a lot of people were asking me, do you think there could be another game in the series? And my answer back then was a confident, no, I don't think so. And the reason for that was I just didn't think that Microsoft was interested in having a game of Grounded size and scope be something to be focused on going forward. I thought they were more likely to want to invest in games with bigger budgets that could make a bigger bang and just bring more people into Game Pass and potentially sell millions and millions of copies. And at the time, the developers of Obsidian Entertainment had Avowed and The Outer Worlds 2 in development, and I just assumed that once Grounded was wrapped up, those developers would be moved on to one of those two games. Now, Avowed just recently released, and The Outer Worlds 2 is planned to come sometime this year. And there's been no word on whether or not the Grounded team has been dispersed. I have seen at least one of the people that was working on Grounded was involved with Avowed. I'm not sure about any of the other ones. But what leads me to believe, led me to change my mind is looking at the way that the Grounded compares to some of the other games Obsidian's released recently. And one thing that really stood out to me, and this is a picture of a tweet that was posted from the Grounded Twitter feed or X feed, and that's that the game had over 20 million players. And this was in February of 2024, before the game launched on PlayStation and Nintendo Switch. Now, there's been no data on the release on either one of those platforms in terms of how many players are played on them, but I certainly think it's reasonable to think that at least several 100,000 people played it on each one of them. And the reason it's probably more than that, and the reason I can say that with confidence is that right after that happened, which was in April of 2024, I saw a huge surge in views on my YouTube channel. Now, this could just be anecdotal, but I think it kind of makes sense because it lines up exactly with the timing that my views doubled right after the release on PlayStation and Nintendo Switch. I saw tons of comments from new players on the videos I had posted, and even still to this day, I'm still seeing new people that are just coming to the game, asking questions, and just looking for insight into what's going on in the game, how to do things, looking for updated versions of videos and stuff like that. So even now, a couple years later, after the 1.0 release and almost a full year after the release on PlayStation and Nintendo Switch, there's still new people coming to the game and still new people trying it. And there's also a large number of people that have come back to the game that had just kind of, like me, maybe took a break from it, and after more than a year have come back and started playing it again. Now, in addition to that, what I did was I went and looked at the Steam numbers for Obsidian games. Now, the reason I'm looking at Steam numbers is because it's the only source of actual data you can get out there. You can't see how many people are playing any games on Xbox or PlayStation or Nintendo Switch or anywhere else, really. Steam is the only platform that will actually show the numbers that are of players and the interest in a game because the API is available. So this is a screenshot from SteamDB, which is showing all the Obsidian games that have been released on Steam. And what you'll see here is a green line. The green line represents the time period when Microsoft and Xbox acquired Obsidian, which was in 2018. So it was like late 2018. I think it was December 2018 when they acquired them. So since Microsoft's acquired them, The Outer Worlds released, Grounded released, Pentiment released, then there's the Outer Worlds Spacer's Choice Edition, which you can just roll into the Outer Worlds, and then Avowed's the most recent release, and then upcoming is going to be the Outer Worlds 2, which is supposed to be coming sometime this year. Prior to that, there was the Pillars of Eternity games and Fallout New Vegas. And what I want to point out here is you'll notice that since the acquisition, the 5 games that were released so far, or the 4 games that were released so far, since there's 2 Outer Worlds entries on here, Grounded has way more followers than any of the other games, and it also had a higher peak concurrent player count than any of those games. Now, I will say that the 32,000 that's showing on this picture was during a free weekend, but the game did have over 27,000 players for the 1.0 release. So even with the slightly smaller number, it's still more than any of those other games. And you have to go all the way back to 2015 to find a game, which is the original Pillars of Eternity, that had a higher peak concurrent player count. And even looking back at all those games, none of those other games surpassed Grounded in terms of followers. So the interest in Grounded, at least since the acquisition and even going back years, it's been the game that's drawn the most interest even on Steam. So that kind of coincides with the fact that the game was super popular and had over 20 million people trying it. Even though most of those people were probably on Game Pass, the game was still wildly popular on Steam. Now, also looking at the recent games that were released by Obsidian since the acquisition by Microsoft, Avowed, Pentiment, Grounded, and The Outer Worlds. The only one of those I haven't tried is Pentiment. That's a much smaller scope game, so I'm not going to talk about that. I can't comment on it. But I did try Avowed. I put a bunch of time in The Outer Worlds, and obviously I have tons of time in Grounded. I can confidently say that of those 3 games, Grounded is by far the best game in every possible way. It's more polished. The pacing of the game feels better. The world feels, the game, the story, the world, it just pulls you into it, and it's more immersive than those other games. And it just made me, like, when I played Avowed, I was almost like, is this the same studio that made Grounded? Now, there's nothing wrong with Avowed or The Outer Worlds. In my opinion, they're both just like average games. They're not bad, they're not great, but I just don't think they stand up, and I don't think they compare to Grounded. Even though Grounded had a much smaller team working on it, and maybe that's why Grounded ended up being just a better game. Had a smaller team with a smaller scope, and they were able to focus on it and put their heart and soul into the game and just make it the best game it could possibly be. So on top of that, I also went and looked at all of the Xbox Studios games that have been released on Steam since Grounded released. Now, Grounded officially released in September of 2022, but I went back and pulled the games that were all the way back to July of 2020 because Grounded did release in early access at the end of July in 2020. And on the screen now, you're going to see all those games that are on there. And one thing you'll notice is that since Grounded actually fully released 1.0, it has outperformed every game in peak players, even with the smaller number of 27,000, I think it was like 27,400 or 500, has more followers than all those other games by 3-fold. And you have to go back and looking at the games that have been released since then. Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024, that's a huge franchise. It beat that. Age of Mythology Retold, that's a remake of a wildly popular game. It beat that. It killed Minecraft Legends. It killed Senua's Saga Hellblade 2. And it just beats everything. You have to go back to Halo Infinite, which this was a free-to-play multiplayer version of the flagship game for Xbox that had the biggest numbers. Prior to that, you have the Forza Horizon, Age of Empires, Forza 4, and then the previous Microsoft Flight Simulator from 2020. Those are the games that beat it in terms of actual like peak player counts, and only Forza and Forza 5 and Forza 4, Forza Horizon 5 and 4 had a more followers. Grounded had more followers on Steam than Halo Infinite. That just goes to show you the interest. And I think it's telling here that this game just kind of outperformed even what I thought. When I went back and looked at the success of the game in terms of how many people played it and how many people I thought purchased it, and I thought the game did pretty well financially. I didn't think it was like a huge success in terms of like hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in profit, but it absolutely 100% had to be profitable because with such a small development team and even selling a couple million copies, it would have easily paid for itself. So with all that data behind us, I think that's just data that proves that I think Grounded could easily get a sequel, but there's even more reason that I think that going forward, it would make sense for this game to get a sequel. So first of all there was a recent interview with Obsidian's higher ups with PC Gamer. And in that interview where they talk, and because it was coinciding with, I think it was like a DICE presentation or something like that at a developer conference, Obsidian said they want to focus on creating games that will be mild successes, not smash hits. So they're not trying to take massive risks and going for the home run, which you could easily strike out. If you strike out, then that could be the end of your studio. That's happened so many times in recent years where a game, the most recently, just with Concord, they took a huge risk with Concord, spent hundreds of millions of dollars on it. The game didn't land with players, and Sony just shut the whole studio down and got rid of all the developers. That's what can happen if you go for the home run and you strike out really badly. So while I'm not sure if Microsoft kind of agrees with this. I mean, they let them come out and say this in an interview. So maybe Obsidian is positioning itself, instead of being a AAA studio, more of a high AA, low AAA studio, where they're going to release polished games that aren't going to be like the best. They're not going to be game of the year contenders, but they're going to be really good games that are of smaller scope than you would normally think. And like I said, I think Grounded kind of just is the epitome of that mindset, especially of the last couple of games they've released. Another factor to consider is the fact that Xbox, which I thought was really going to kind of just pivot away from Game Pass, because in my opinion, Game Pass is an absolutely stellar subscription service for players. You pay a monthly fee and get access to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of games. You get new games every month. You get day one. If you're paying for Ultimate, you get day one access, or Ultimate or the PC Game Pass, you're getting day one access to all of the first party games that are coming out. And even with the core version, you're getting access to a couple of dozen games, of which Grounded is one of them. So I thought like Game Pass is just a great subscription from the player perspective. Personally, looking at it from a financial perspective, like from an actual business perspective, I just thought that Microsoft might pivot off of it because it just doesn't seem like it's growing right now. But Xbox has not stopped. They just seem to be doubling down on Game Pass. They're still pushing it. They're not really talking about selling consoles. They're not worried about exclusives to their ecosystem. It's their mindset seems to be, or their business plan for the coming years seems to be, we're going to release our games on Game Pass. We're going to sell them on Steam. We're going to sell them on PlayStation. We're going to sell them on Nintendo Switch when possible. And that's just what they're going to do going forward, and see how that goes for the next couple of years. And with Grounded having over 20 million players, and like I said, from my research and my analysis, it looks like at least the majority, if not the super majority of those players, likely tried the game through Game Pass. How can you beat a game that's made by a team of like a couple dozen people, getting over 20 million players to try it? That is massive engagement. If Netflix had a television show that was made by like 5 people, and it ended up getting 20 million people watching it, versus some of the newer shows that they dump hundreds of millions of dollars into that don't get those amount of views, they're surely going to want to do another project with that team. Just look at Squid Game. Squid Game ended up having massive viewership for the scope of it, and they ended up paying them a lot of money to make a second season. So Grounded could be that kind of game for Game Pass. Maybe they make another game in the series and it just pops off just like the first one did. Because another thing is, the game has a massive rabid fan base. There's so many people that are dedicated to this game that are still playing it. I've had people recently tell me somebody told me they had 4,000 hours in Grounded. And I was like, I think that's more hours than I have in almost any game I've ever played. And that's insane to have that much time in a game like this, which this isn't like an MMO. This isn't a live service game that's getting updated every week. It's a standalone game that you can play by yourself or with friends. It did add NG Plus for some replayability, but for one person to put 4,000 hours into it, that's quite impressive. I know like many other people commented saying they have over 1,000 hours in the game. A lot of people have hundreds and hundreds of hours in the game. So the game can keep people playing it, and there is a dedicated fan base that really wants more from this series. In addition to that, the game right now is in the best state that it's ever been. I've said this before in previous videos recently. I feel like going back and playing the game now, after having not played it for over a year, and the last couple of updates, which I didn't really get to experience, the game just feels so much better now than it did before. At 1.0, the game was fun, but it definitely was missing something. But now all those missing pieces have been filled in. There's all the quality of life. The game just feels super polished. Playing the game now recently for, I don't know, 30 or 40 hours, something like that over the last couple weeks, maybe even longer than that. I haven't run into any like stupid bugs where the bugs are like clipping through the train and can't get out, or like weird pathing stuff. The game's running much smoother. Now, granted, I do have a newer PC, but I'm able to run the game now at like high frame rates on 2K resolution and have absolutely no issues. Before, I had to cap the game at 60 FPS because I would have performance issues. Again, that was on an older PC, but still, the game just feels like it's more polished. It feels like they've worked out all the kinks. And what that means is they have a really solid foundation that if they want to, and if they're allowed to, they could build off that foundation. And I think they could get another game out another game building off that foundation in a relatively short amount of time. I'm not saying they could just like flip a switch and bam, here's a new game, but they have a solid foundation to work from. And what they could do with a sequel is they could build, or another game in the series, they could take anything that they could build, they could take what was good in the first game and then improve on the things that were average or things that they weren't happy with. And I also believe that, and I've said this many times before, I think a lot was left on the table from the first game. I think it was quite obvious if you followed the game through early access and then you were there for the 1.0 release. And when I was kind of like critical of the game, a lot of that was stemming from the fact that I thought that the game did not turn out the way that it was originally planned to be turned out. And the reason for that ended up being, honestly, it was because of memory constraints from the Xbox One consoles. The plan was they were going to put more in the game. Like, they just flat out said they couldn't put more in the game because of memory constraints on the older consoles. Had they not had to deal with that, the upper yard would have more stuff. The whole yard, the yard, you may have been able to go in the house. There would have been so many more things you could have done. I think originally they were planning on letting people go in the shed, like having the shed actually be fully populated. There's so much more they could have done with it that they ended up having to cut because the game, they literally hit the limit in terms of the memory constraints. And then you also have to factor in that aside from everything that's in the game, they also had to set aside some space, right, or memory for us to be able to build stuff. So you can build like a ton of stuff in the game, and the game runs pretty well. So there was a lot left on the table that I'm sure they'd be like, you know what, if we could go back and put this stuff in, we'd love to do it. And that's the kind of stuff that maybe they could work it into another game in the series. Maybe they could just take, or maybe not exactly what that stuff was, but maybe they could add other stuff that was similar to it and say, here's what we really want to do. We got a new generation of consoles. We got better hardware now. And now we can just up the ante on what we did the first time and just make an even better game. Because honestly, a lot of times sequels turn out to be better than the originals. A recent example of that is Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. Kingdom Come Deliverance was a good game. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is just better than the first game. So you took a good game and made a great game on top of it by just improving upon all the shortcomings of the first game. And that's something that could easily be done here because the development team proved they can make a good game, and there's no reason they couldn't make an even better game the second time. And then lastly, there's an animated TV series that is possibly still in the works. I've looked around, I've asked, nobody can say yes or no, it's still going. I haven't found any notification saying it's been canceled, but there was an animated TV series announced years ago. And if that's still in the works and still planned to be released, wouldn't it make sense to maybe release a new game in the series to coincide with the release of that television show, which would then subsequently probably draw interest from on both sides? So you'd get people that were playing the game be like, oh yeah, of course I want to watch a TV show. And people that watch TV show that never heard of the video games, oh, there's a new game in this series. Why wouldn't they want to go jump in there? You're watching the TV show and you're not like, wait, I can actually go play the TV show or play in the world of the TV show in a new game. Of course I'd jump in there and do that. So all these factors just kind of lead me to believe that there's a possibility there could be a sequel. Now, I'm going to sit here and say, I'm going to be honest with you. There's been nothing said. I haven't been able to find anything saying a sequel is in the works. It's even being considered, but I just thought it would be a good idea and it'd be worth talking about because a lot of people have been recently asking me, do you think there'll be a sequel? Would you like to see a sequel? Of course, I'd like to see another game in the series. I even said if they can't make another game in this series, I'd love to see them make the same team that made Grounded make a survival game in the Avowed world, which is the Pillars of Eternity world. I'd love to see them make another survival game because they did really well with the first survival game with and added RPG mechanics on it. I think they could make an even better one the second time around because, you know, when you do something once, the first time you do something, you might do great at it, but the next time you can do even better because you can learn from your mistakes. So anyway, I'm sure if I'm going to ask this question and the answer is probably going to be yes. If I say, do you want to see another game in the Grounded series? Do you want to see a prequel, a sequel? Let me know in the comments down below. I'm sure everybody's going to say yes. If you found this video interesting, informative, if you just liked it, make sure to hit the like button. And once again, if you haven't already done so, hit the subscribe button. It really does help the channel out. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.